Welcome back, everybody, to the Birdies and Bourbon Show. Man, this is a real treat for us today. We've got documentarian Matt Hamachek on. You may be familiar with Matt from some of his previous work, Cartel Land and Amanda Knox Story. Those are two that I've watched of yours. And we're going to dig through the Tiger documentary today. So, Matt, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. So before we get started, if you want to share a little about yourself and how do you go from Cartel Land and the Amanda Knox Story to a Tiger Woods documentary?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. It's really, honestly, what I love about working in documentary film is that you get to do these incredible deep dives on these subjects. It's kind of like doing, graduate level work on this thing that you never thought you would before. So with Amanda Knox, it was, first off, learning to speak a little bit of Italian over the course of a year and a half of working on the thing, learning about the Italian legal system, which is infinitely more complicated than learning the language, and just sort of getting into the psychology of things like, does somebody really, fold under the pressure of questioning a police officer? Is that a bunch of nonsense? And, of course, in that case, it wasn't nonsense. And it was something that I had no idea about beforehand. And so it's getting to know the intricacies of that story and all of those things. And then with Cartel Land, it was just like, I had never done anything about like a vigilante group before that was basically on both sides of the border. It was fascinating because, in the documentary world, you don't get to cover people that often that are like the guys at Arizona Border Recon who were, taking on the cartels on our side of the border. And then similarly to just be able to take on a story like The Doctor in Mexico. And, I think with that one, it was just great because it was this theme of, as the movie opens up, it's sort of this idea of what is right and what is wrong. And it's an incredible sort of thing to question and to see play out, and who's the good guys and who are the bad guys, and how murky that kind of thing is. So, and then this one, I had been wanting to tell the Tiger Woods story pretty much since I did Amanda Knox, which was I think after Cartel. Yeah, it was after Cartel Land, right after Cartel Land. And the reason is because I think I saw this connective tissue between the two stories in an interesting way, and that both people were in large part sort of created by the media and by public perception. And I thought that was an interesting thing to continue working on from the Amanda Knox story into the Tiger Woods story. And I was obviously, I had watched Tiger growing up. I still remember in '97, I was 17 years old. Was I watching the Masters every single year? Nah, not so much. But like, I do remember my dad calling me down and saying, sort of in the same way that, there are these things that would happen as I was growing up, whether it was, the home run summer, sure. Things like that like he would definitely say, you've got to come watch this. Like, this thing's about to happen. It's really important. And I remember my dad coming down in '97 for the Masters and saying, like, you've got to see this. This is a historical moment and something that people will be talking about for the rest of, your life. And then I, like everybody else, I was captivated by Tiger's dominance and his sort of, his like megawatt smile and all of the things that like he brought. And then as just started to, I started to finally pick up the game, personally about 4 or 5 years ago. And when you start to play golf and you realize how, I think the thing that I love and hate about it is how hard it is, and but for the people that can handle that sort of, how would I put it? Like it's almost like masochistic. Like you have to like, sure. Be very comfortable being bad at something,
not being successful, right?
Yeah, and that's honestly like, how many people are there that like doing that? Most people, when they think of what they want to do, especially in their free time, it's like, you want to go do something that you really enjoy, and that for a lot of people, they want to do something that's easy, that they're successful at. And I know, as somebody who has broken 90 once in his life, and normally it's a minor ticket tape parade in my mind when I break 100. It's an incredibly difficult game, but I love it. It's for me, it's as much about sort of being alone on the course or with a really good friend on a course, and just having 5 or whatever hours to not be on your phone and just sort of be out there and either thinking to yourself or just hanging out with a buddy and just talking and, talking shit and all that good stuff. So,
yeah.
Well, we loved the documentary, and we could tell that you were a big Tiger fan, a big Tiger fan, because he didn't miss a putt for like 2.5 hours.
Yeah. No, we didn't get to, because of the nature of the film, because it was much more obviously, I'm sure golf fans out there were just like, oh, why didn't they cover this? And why didn't they cover that? And I totally understand that. We were obviously out to answer a very simple question, which is, who is Tiger Woods? And felt like, this was an opportunity for a lot of people who don't care about Tiger and a lot of people that don't like golf to watch something that was as much about like our relationship with fame and, lots of other things in America as it is about anything else. So the golf definitely got pulled back, and it was something that we talked about a lot. I talked a lot about that with my editing team. I said, at one point we had shown the 2006 Masters, which is, I think Earl, Tiger's father, was actually on his deathbed at that time, and Tiger had a pretty monumental collapse, and we in that tournament, and it was an incredible thing in terms of what you're talking about, because so much of the film is about dominance and not really about, like, we didn't, we had early, when you make a doc, obviously you start out with essentially, if it ends up being, let's say what ours was, a 3-hour finished product, you at times you start out with something that's like 6 hours, and then you start to whittle it down, and it makes the story stronger, and you figure out what your themes are and things like that. And, it's a process of discovery. And so at one point we had a section about a swing change in 97 after the Masters. And we had this, that was a time when Tiger was struggling a lot, and you were able to see him, basically play the best golf that anybody had ever seen in 97. Right. And it was dominant in a way that I don't think people could even imagine. I think that's when everybody started to talk about, like, do we have to change the courses, and do we have to change Augusta for Tiger and things like that. But on top of that, he just on a dime went to Butch Harmon and said, Butch, we're changing the swing, and it's not going to happen incrementally, and it's not going to, it's going to happen overnight, and we're not tinkering, we're fundamentally changing here. And that's, of course, fascinating. He did the same thing with Hank Haney in, I guess, 03, 04, before he finally won his major after that gap in the 2005 Masters. So that was all in there. And of course, both of those times you kind of would have gotten to see him, slipping up a little bit more. But I think for me, the thing that I missed the most out of almost any cut that we changed in the movie, and I'm glad we changed it, don't get me wrong, it was important for the story to not include it, but I do miss that scene of him in 2006 at the Masters when Earl was on his deathbed, because there's this incredible moment where those greens at Augusta are so fast, and he makes the tiniest little putt, and the ball just trickles down past the hole and keeps going, and he literally falls to his knees. I don't know if you can remember it at all, but it was just, it showed just how much he how much this was weighing on him. And that's one of the things that I always found fascinating about Tiger, is how much outside things that are going on in his life, when you talk to the people that really knew him best, that we had the opportunity to, they all mention how much outside things in Tiger's life affect him on the golf course, and how, the master of compartmentalization, there were still things that could get to him. I think that was fascinating. And but yeah, then, but I have to say, one of the nice things about the way it turned out is that when you finally do get to the 2015 era time when his back really started to fail him, and you start to see him slip for the first time, that when you see the yips sort of take over Tiger's life, it's obviously very powerful because if you're just seeing the movie, but it was still powerful in real life. It was a representation of how incredible it was to see this guy who couldn't chip, the thing that he was, who's better than Tiger? It's maybe Phil's short game is a little bit better, but that's maybe, right? And so to see him stumble like that, I thought was just, incredibly powerful. When we started to see that footage of him at Phoenix in 2015, it was just like, what has happened to this guy?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, lots of good stuff there. So I was going to start with, did you, and I'm going to ask the question in a different way. So when you started out, so you wanted to record, you wanted to do a documentary about Tiger, you probably had in your mind's eye, like, this is going to look like this, right? I mean, you've got some kind of blueprint of kind of where you're going to go in direction wise, right?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think like I told you, I had this idea that I thought that there was this connective tissue, just this rough idea of, I feel like this is a guy similar to Amanda that had been sort of created in the public's eye and the media's eye, and that a lot of people had a hand in what we thought Tiger Woods would be. Because by the time I was starting to think about making this movie, 2009, this was sort of 2016 when I had this idea. 2009 had already happened. And what I realized is that this guy has been covered by more people and, written about. He's done press conferences. He's talked so much to the public. And then in 2009 on Thanksgiving night, we realized that, we know next to nothing about the guy. And honestly, I didn't feel like we had that much better of an idea of who he was even after the scandal happened, because what we got a window into is a very specific chapter in his life, right? And so there was this question of, how did he get to this place, right? Why did we know so little about him? Aside from the fact that he's an incredible golfer and, he's an incredible salesman of all these products and all these things. And so I think, for me, it was, okay, we have to do this in a different way than everybody else has sort of done it before in terms of the telling of the Tiger Woods story, right? Because you can go and you can be a journalist and you can walk outside the ropes or inside the ropes with him or whatever it is, and you can write about his golfing prowess. And that's been done, I think, fairly well by lots of people. I think that, people have written long form pieces that were in some cases really insightful or, really insightful, and in other cases not, about like who he is as a person. And so the thing that I think Matt and I, my co-director, sort of honed in on was, the first thing we have to do is try to get Tiger and see if he's willing to get into all of this stuff and talk to us about it. So we reached out to his camp, and, they very politely let us know that he had this contractual obligation with, another media company we found out later to be Golf TV, I think. And he couldn't do it because of that. And then after that, it was, okay, well, what else can we do that really hadn't been done before? And so we said, well, we have to find these people that, really knew Tiger over the course of his life. And, were his kindergarten teacher or his first high school girlfriend that was in a relationship with him for 3 years, Steve Williams, Nick Faldo. Yes, he's Sir Nick Faldo is a golfing god, but beyond that, because he had won the 96 Masters and Tiger was the 96 amateur, they were automatically paired with each other for Thursday of the 97 Masters. And then he was also in 2006, after Earl's death, paired with Tiger again for the 2006 British Open. So what we tried to do is not only find these people that were sort of golfing gods, but also people who really had spent time with Tiger. And obviously beyond that, Nick's, he covered him from the booth with Nance for all these years, and in other forms, because he wasn't always just doing the Masters, obviously.
Oh yeah.
So, it was finding all these people, and what we realized was, if we could get these people and convince them to talk on camera in many cases for the first time ever. We could see a side of Tiger Woods that had never been, seen before. And, in answer to your original question, which was, did I have this idea of what I wanted to be? I think that, like we talked about earlier, it is a process of discovery. And I think that if you have access to those types of people, you really have to listen and let them tell you what the truth is, rather than saying, this is the rigid story that I want to tell. And if they deviate, I'm just going to say, well, the hell with you. I'm going to go talk to somebody else who says exactly what I want. I mean, that would be stupid. You know what I mean? Especially if you can get Steve Williams, and especially if you can get Dina and the high school, the kindergarten teacher, and you can get Joe Groman, the pro at the Navy Golf Course, spent years with Tiger. It's like, so you listen to those people, and then they start building out the story for you, and then they send you on these paths that you just didn't even know existed because they hadn't been written about before. And so that's what makes kind of doing documentaries so awesome,
Yeah. So you mentioned Sir Nick, and Rocco was on also. By the way, did Rocco insist on smoking cigars in the room?
No cigars, no cigars from Rocco. No.
So earlier you mentioned Butch, you mentioned Hank. So there's a lot of, so as a, and again, we're, Dan and I are both huge Tiger fans.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, right, I mean, he's just been written about just in every outlet to the nth degree. So, and everybody's aware of, what's been written about what's going on with those relationships. But was it, I mean, when you're looking and thinking about, okay, here's who I'm going to talk to, right? And I'm just going to throw a few names out, right? So one, Butch, Hank, Phil. I mean, that guy loves the camera and a microphone. It's like, I mean, maybe it's because if we get Phil on, he isn't going to shut up, and we're done, right? So nobody else is coming. But you've got other individuals, and I'll bring this up a little later because I want to talk kind of as you've kind of dug through. But and I really see your documentary as you mentioned it. It's not, I wouldn't call it a golf documentary. It's a documentary about a golfer, which is also a person. And, I thought it was well put together, and I thought it was very factual in your findings and what you kind of laid out. I mean, nothing malicious by intent. It was just the facts that occurred, or a series of events that occurred over the, 40-plus-year-old individual's life. So, as you're kind of looking through that and you're looking, okay, who do we go to? I mean, were those avenues you tried to go down to get those individuals to engage, or you?
Yeah, no, the answer is we talked to everybody that you could possibly think of that had a major role in Tiger's life. And there were different reasons why different people said yes and no. And, I think what was fascinating to me is how conflicted everybody that we talked to was about participating in anything about Tiger. And it's interesting, a lot of the, I'd say half the people that were in the doc, were cut out of Tiger's life by Tiger abruptly at different points, right? So the natural inclination is, okay, well, maybe those people have an axe to burn or something, or an axe to grind, sorry. And we have to be cautious of that because, you've got to be sure that people aren't just painting a negative picture of a guy because, right, which I don't even think most of them did, because they were cut out so abruptly. And the interesting thing is that to a T, every single person that we talked to was just fiercely protective of Tiger to this day, no matter what he did to them. And their biggest concern in a lot of their cases was, look, I don't want this to be the TMZ tabloid sensational thing that they had seen play out in the tabloids, and they didn't want it to be the glowing puff piece that has been made 1,000 times over about Tiger, and you can watch it on Golf TV now. Like, they do segments. It's like a 5-minute segment about like what his Starbucks drink is or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's like they wanted to make sure that this was going to be a real thing. We were going to try to tell like a very complex, nuanced portrait of who the guy was. And, and then, it's certainly with a lot of the people reached out to, there was just different reasons why it was just a no-go and everybody took months of convincing. And sometimes those months led to a no. But we were lucky because a lot of these really key people in his life, the months of convincing led to yeses. And so, I went and I'm just trying to think of his name. He one of Tiger's best friends, a tour pro who
Like Noda?
no, it wasn't. We reached out to Noda as well, but I'm trying to think of what his name is. Mark O'Mara.
Mark O'Mara. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I went out to the senior tour and followed Mark on a course when it was a huge rain delay, until finally, like, Mark came off the course, and I was able to like talk to him and just say, "Hey, this is what we're making." Because I couldn't get a hold of him any other way, and it was at Firestone actually, I think. And I talked to him for ages, and he said yes, and then went back and said no, and eventually stayed at no. But I mean, we talked. It was exhaustive, the process of reaching out to like everybody who had people at Nike that were so obscure that you couldn't even imagine. We tried to talk to everybody, and the thing is that even if people say no, to be on camera, it doesn't mean they said no to.
They're still sharing a story or something with you, right?
Yeah, and getting and again, it is a process of discovery. So even if you don't see it on screen, doesn't mean that I didn't have probably 10 hours of conversations with a lot of the people we're talking about that informed whether or not the ideas that I was hearing from other people were correct. And there were people that after I was fairly far into the thing, I would bounce stuff off of and say like, "Hey, I totally get it. This is not another phone call to try to convince you to be on camera, but I just want to make sure I'm right about this thing," and a lot of those people were very generous with their time. Yeah.
One of the things that I thought about in this documentary, and you guys touched on it, a couple different times with, clips of, would you take 100 wins or 19 majors and this and that, right? That Jack relationship. Did you guys reach out to Jack and did you want him to be a part of it?
I think we reached out to Jack's people and talked to them a bit about it. And, it was the same thing. It was convincing, and then ultimately came down to a no. And I think, everybody was just, you can tell people what kind of film you're making, and they ultimately have to decide what's best for them. But, obviously the Jack part of it was interesting because there was always a debate about how early you start to introduce the story of Jack and how much those majors mean to Tiger. And I think that the way we ended up landing on it, ultimately was to do it before the 2008 US Open. But I think it makes sense to do it there because it explains why a guy decides to play, on Torrey, which is I think a fairly long course, just to walk that on a broken leg and no ACL is hard to imagine walking that many holes, and sort of justify it by, introducing the Jack thing there. What
did you find out about the relationship? Because you probably explored it at least. There's a huge amount of admiration. When Cal and I are listening to different stories about Jack, I mean, there's so many more similarities with Tiger and Jack now in terms of like playing tennis. He wears one watch and he's like colorblind. There's so many similarities. It's just like, what did you find out about that?
I mean, I think look, I think everybody that we talked to said that there's a ton of mutual admiration there. Okay. There isn't some juicy backstory or anything like that. It's basically two guys who obviously have a great deal of admiration for each other. But nothing else besides that, really.
Okay. All right. Cal's back.
Well, before you guys kick me off the show, it hadn't even gotten bad yet. I mean, it's still good. But what I was asking, so was it coincidence or was it planned that this dropped? So you dropped the first episode dropped on HBO January the 10th, second drops the 17th, but it's a week after the first episode is the following week of the father and son, the PNC tournament. So, and you bookend your story with Earl. Or the documentary, you book him with Earl, and I'm just wondering if that is that coincidence?
It's total coincidence. Yeah. And honestly, like when the thing comes out is so far out of my hands as a director. It's a network decision and everything. So I couldn't even speak to it. But yes, obviously a nice coincidence, but certainly nothing that was planned.
All right, reading too much into that with them, but I'm like going, but because he's Tiger's out there with Charlie, and then this hits, it's kind of like it's good, good timing. So yeah, convenience, I guess. So speaking to that, and again, I mentioned you open up with Earl, and you do get kind of the real story, and I think it was a business partner of Earl's, right, when Tiger was kind of growing up, that was on and shared a lot with you. But as Earl is. As it relates to the commentary surrounding Earl, do you think that built a kind of a no fault of Tiger in the stories and kind of what you learned? Meaning, as Tiger kind of goes through his career, and then and as it's labeled, you've got the rise, the fall, and the comeback, right? And is there any tie in there that he was just kind of led down a path and it may have redirected his moral compass, if you will?
I don't know. I mean, look, it's interesting. One of the things I wanted to not do in the movie is to make it a morality tale. And what I mean by that is I was conflicted about everything, and really, Pete McDaniel, the guy that you were mentioning, is Earl Wood's biographer, but also just an incredible close friend of the family. And Joe Groman, same thing. I mean, both of those guys will tell you that Earl was as good of a father as you could possibly imagine. And look, we are all extremely complicated people, and the idea that there is a simple linear line between what Joe talks about Earl doing on the golf course that Tiger witnessed to what Tiger ended up deciding to do, what Tiger ended up doing beforehand. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, and I don't think that that's fair to necessarily say that it's like this perfect thing that, connects the two. But I also, I look at Earl and the time commitment that he gave to his son, and the love he had for his son. And I think that is as substantial, probably infinitely more so, than any of the things that people would say that Earl did, quote unquote, wrong in front of Tiger. I think that Earl was incredibly savvy in terms of how he introduced Tiger to the world. And I think that he had these very significant dreams, but I think one of the things that a lot of people talked about is that he had this vision for what Tiger could become. And he talks about at the beginning of the movie about how he was going to transcend the game. And as one of our guys taught, one of the subjects talked about it, he was going to unite the different races and tribes of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, that was, truly how Earl saw Tiger. At the same time, I think Earl was savvy enough to realize that was also a really good way to introduce Tiger from a marketing standpoint,
Yeah.
And I think Nike realized that too, because when you watch those early commercials, they carried the torch from what Earl said at the 1996 Haskins Awards banquet directly into the commercials. They had this sort of like, it was sort of messianic sort of like, here's this guy who's going to change the way we see the entire world. And so Nike took that, and I think that in an interesting way, the media and the public took exactly what Earl and Nike had done, and they ran with it and built Tiger up to be this, godlike person.
Yeah.
And then in 2009, he essentially revealed himself to be a human being like the rest of us, who's flawed, and
who's not flawed, right?
What?
Who's not flawed?
Yeah, exactly. Who isn't? So to me, it was an interesting thing because, look, you hear from all these people in the movie about how Tiger had felt this insane level of pressure to live up to. Rachel Yucatel talks about it. This was just before the scandal broke. He said to her, "I'm afraid that if people see the real Tiger, that I won't be living up to what their version of me that they've created in their head is." And I think that Earl was sort of the first person that sort of started this idea, because I think he really thought that about Tiger. But I think, like Nike, he realized that this was also an incredible way to, from a marketing perspective, to introduce him. And it took off. It worked, right? I mean, I think everybody built Tiger up to be something more than just a guy who's really good at golf. And so,
well, yeah, I mean, at that point, you didn't have a chance to fail, right? I mean, you were all in. I mean, it's like it's got to happen. Fortunately, it did. Which it's been great for all of us to watch. Over a lifetime. But yeah, it actually came to fruition.
some of it did. Certainly, like the golf part of it definitely did, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think with everything else, it's up for debate. I don't know what everybody would say. Did Tiger if Earl's vision was that he was going to be the guy that united the different races and tribes of humanity, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's capable of doing that, really. And
you think about names like maybe like a Hendricks or an Ali or something along those lines, right? That's what Earl was figured that kind of legacy where like Tiger's name would be associated with those types of names.
Yeah, and I think with folks like Ali and I think they really, I haven't made anything about them. So, and I haven't really done a ton of research on them, but you get the sense that they wanted to take on that role. And I think that one of the interesting things about Tiger, when you see, there's a clip from a show, I can't remember what it is. I think it's from an ESPN show where the guy says, your father says you're going to be as important as Gandhi and Jesus. Like, what do you have to say to that? And Tiger's response was, that's just a proud father, talking about his son.
Right.
But I think he had a reluctance to take on that, that role, because I think, Tiger was this guy who was just, he was just focused on golf, and it was golf, 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 golf. And I think the rest of it was a distraction in his mind in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
As you go down that road, so you think, a lot of people will say, and have been coined, and they've said, Tiger Woods is an introvert, right? Mm. And I don't know, is that by, so I guess I'll make a statement and then ask your opinion on, in your findings. But, I think I wouldn't call him an introvert, right? I mean, when I watch your documentary and I see the videos, is it Dina, his high school girlfriend?
Right.
He's got his shirt. He's a teenager. He's having a good time, right? I mean, you look at as a kindergartner, you look at him on with Bob Hope and a couple other guys, as however old, 2 or 3 years old, right on. So I mean, this is going to lead into the Vegas boys, but you see, and then you start to hear about all these things that Tiger is doing, and as what I consider an introvert, those are not introverted expressions. Those are the exact opposite, right? And as you start to unpack the whole 2009 incident, and as things or scandal and things occur, I don't really see introverts kind of doing that. So I would say, is introvert a way of saying he's private and he's selective because he's guarded? Maybe it's I don't hope it's not harsh, but maybe it's a lazy way of kind of condensing that into one word to mean something. But I think the two are exactly the opposite. And I think that there's no way in hell that the guy's introverted.
Well, it's interesting. It's a great question. I think that let's sort of unpack it in different ways. The first part of it is what you see with Dina and in the home videos. I think Dina, when we talked to her, would say that Tiger disappeared right around that time, and that was something that really troubled her. Right? She was worried that at least at his home, that was a person that he was not allowed to be, because it was such a sort of, she said it was so quiet. She said that Tiger told her it was so quiet and so sort of reserved, and that he, wasn't able to be the person that he was at her house. And that's sort of one of the reasons that he really, was in that relationship for so long, is that she allowed him to be a person that he didn't get to be. And she felt that after that time period, that version of Tiger, disappeared. I think that the introverted versus sort of extroverted thing, I think in a lot of ways came up as a comparison to other athletes of his stature. And so I think that a lot of what people that we talked to mentioned, especially the folks at Nike, whether it was the folks that are on camera or the other people that we talked to in our research, was that they were dead set on finding the next Michael Jordan, because when Tiger turned pro in 96 96, that was sort of towards the end of of Jordan's career, and they really needed to find that next sort of transformational athlete. And they kind of used the Michael Jordan blueprint for Tiger Woods in terms of how to push somebody out onto the public. And I think when people say that Tiger is an introvert, they're comparing him to pretty much like the A1 extrovert of all time in Michael Jordan, right? And so I think that's kind of what the comparison is. You know,
Gotcha.
Obviously I haven't spent a lot of time with him, but they did say that look, you have to be a certain type of person to be. Tiger would spend, for everybody we talked to, whether it was at different points in his life, whether it was the pro at the local Navy golf course, Joe Groman, or it was Steve Williams. But this was a guy who enjoyed being out on the range, hitting thousands of golf balls a day by himself, maybe having a coach there at some points during the year. But a lot of times, from what we read and what we were told, it wasn't like Butch and Hank were there every day. It was a lot of times it was Tiger by himself, and then he would go check in with people, or he would send video footage of himself hitting the ball to those guys, things like that. So in order to be a guy like Tiger, you have to be comfortable basically being by yourself on a range, and not really seeing a lot of other people. And so I think that that's what people mean when they say introvert. But I also think he was shy and goofy when you talk about Vegas. Like Tiffany Masters, who's the VIP host that we interviewed on camera, she said that he was not. Michael Jordan was able to go into almost any environment and be Michael Jordan. I think she talks about how he was shy and nerdy and had no idea how to behave around women and just all sorts of stuff like that. And I think that that's sort of what people talk about. Just because behind closed doors he's doing these things that seem like not the actions of an introvert doesn't necessarily mean that he was the entire time. So that's sort of, I think, what people refer to when they say that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So you brought it up. So I want to go into a little bit about Vegas. We definitely saw some clips from Vegas, and he's kind of going down that road. And again, as you've talked to people, you kind of see people and individuals, and you're leading them down this path, or from an Earl perspective, he's kind of guiding him down a path and what he thinks is the right way. And you start seeing him hitting Vegas with MJ, which that huge MJ fan, Barkley. Love that guy. Can't get enough of Barkley, and other kind of colorful characters, if you will.
Yeah.
And now you've got Tiger that just on scene, right? I mean, definitely an impressionable person, albeit how great he was at that time, and what he became to be. But I find it interesting that somebody didn't say, "Hey, wait a minute, you're a 21-year-old guy that may not be the right path to go down." And again, I've been to Vegas plenty of times, and I've had my own share of fun there. Not saying that it's good. I'm not saying that it's bad.
Yeah.
But just with the kind of the shepherding that was happening with him, I found it interesting that you don't really hear anything about that, and it's just kind of looked at as, well, that's what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea, what generally goes on beyond the sort of the Tiger story. The thing you have to keep in mind is, I think that there is oftentimes a myth of an athlete of his stature. And this is something we asked a lot of people about, and it was shocking for me to hear. But you think that he's got all these people that are sort of wrangling him and saying, like, do this, don't do this, et cetera, et cetera. He's one of the most powerful, wealthiest people in the world. And obviously, like, how much influence any of his people necessarily have had on him at different points in his career is anybody's guess. But he is the boss. He's the CEO. It's not like people can come in and say, "Hey, Tiger, we really don't think you should do it." He is an impressionable person, but he also felt probably at the time people talked about it, that there are very few people on this planet who he can relate to and can relate to him. Right. And one of those people was Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan's probably the only person on earth, we talked about how there was this pressure that Tiger was under his entire life, right? That pressure amplified so much after Augusta in '97. And in terms of the crowds and the Tiger mania that started, had already started, but went into hyperdrive afterwards. Talent-wise, there's nobody like Michael Jordan, but I think what people talked to us about was that Jordan was the only athlete on the planet who had faced the mania that Tiger faced on a daily basis. And Tiger wanted to, and had faced the scrutiny by the media the way that Tiger faced it, right? And he wanted to go to the one person on the planet who could probably sort of guide him in that way. And according to the folks we talked about, that was Jordan. And, their friendship obviously has evolved over the years from the folks that we talked to. But, I think after Earl passed in particular, this was a guy who had a compass for many, many years that had been, this was his best friend. This was the guy that sort of created him in the eyes of the media, all of these things. And so I think that a lot of the Vegas stuff, even before Earl's passing, probably was Tiger seeking out a different role model than the one person that he'd had his entire life. And again, this is just coming from folks that we talked to. Sure. He was looking for that. And I think, like we talked about, Jordan is the one guy on the planet who could match him in terms of mania and talent, and having navigated that fairly successfully, obviously, extremely successfully. So I think that's why Tiger gravitated towards him.
Yeah. So I know you're a busy guy, and we gotta let you go soon. But a couple more questions, if you don't mind. Yeah. So in kind of so we're even though we're kind of halfway through the doc, we bounced around a little bit, so it's fine. Yeah. But so you have the press release on there, right? And you've got Tiger coming out to do the presser, after the scandal, and he's dropping it. And to your comments earlier, not to put you on the spot, but again, just as you've talked to people. So in that, hey, Tiger's a CEO, and obviously, he's making the decision ultimately what he is and he isn't going to do, but he's getting advice from people. And, I kind of look at that and I'm thinking of folks like maybe a bad comparison, but, like Matt Lauer, right? I mean, you go back and you've got the interview with Tiger and Lauer. Now, this was pre anything that happened. But again, hey, you've got other individuals at Letterman, you got people that come out and things happen and hey, the light's there, the spotlight's on you. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to take a different path and I'm not going to go down that road. Well, Tiger took the path to go and stand in front of everyone and give, a genuine and sincere statement, and I guess he took advisement or took counsel from folks around him and he elected to go that way. You said it earlier, and we agree. I mean, everybody's flawed, right? I mean, it's the three of us. I mean, no matter who you are, there's something going on somewhere to different degrees. Yeah. What do you think about that whole that situation? And would you, in hindsight, do you think that he's looking back going like, I could have made a different decision, or do you think he's like, I did the right thing?
I don't know. First off, I am not a crisis PR person by any stretch of anybody's imagination. So I don't know how qualified I am to give an answer on that. But I defer to what Pete McDaniel said in the movie, which is, I think that, Pete, as somebody who, was Earl Wood's biographer, spent a lot of time in the family home when Tiger was growing up. He thought, why is this guy doing this thing? This is something that's between him and his wife. I think Pete certainly knows Tiger about as well as you can, and I think that's one opinion. I'm sure there's some PR handbook that says this is what you do when this thing happens, and I'm sure that's the advice that he was given. And I don't know. It depends on what the ultimate goal is, right? Is it repairing your relationship with your sponsors? Is it repairing your relationship with the public? Is it anything else? Who knows? And I have no idea. Does Tiger spend a ton of time looking back and thinking, I wonder if I should have done things this way? Or, one of the things that people point to a lot is about his personality, certainly, is that he is a very forward-thinking person and doesn't spend a ton of time looking back on things. And that's part of what makes him so gifted. It's the compartmentalization, right? It's the same thing that the thing that people always talk about, and the question that still the people that knew him best ask all the time is the thing that served him so well on the golf course good for him off the golf course? And that's an unanswerable question in a lot of ways, but that's sort of the thing that people always brought up.
Yeah, no, yeah, fair enough. I mean, I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer either way. I think it's just an observation there. So
totally.
Yeah. So what? So we're kind of moving through this thing, and Rachel and Dina, do they have a relationship? Because obviously they didn't prior to. Is there anything that happened from the documentary after that? Is there any connection there?
Not that I know of. No. No. I not that I know of.
And so looking, so now fast forward, and we've got Tiger's back. 2019 Masters was, this had to be well in production for the 20. I mean, when he won the Masters of 2019, right?
We had done all of our research at that point. Actually, our first shoot was 3 days or 2 days after the Sunday that he won the 2019 Masters. So we were not at all in the middle of things, and we had just started. And of course, that just everybody just wanted to talk about that then, because these people that grew up with him, and so it was that was the first thing everybody wanted to talk about. But then it also, I think what was nice about it from I think a lot of the people that we spoke to's perspective was that it, like I talked about, one of the things that they were very concerned with is they didn't want it to just be this. Nobody wanted to make a hit piece, including us, about Tiger Woods. Yep. We wanted to get to the bottom of this very important question, which is who he is as a person. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that was nice about the 2019 Masters for the people that we were going to speak to was that there was a happy ending to the story. Mm-hmm. In terms of the comeback and everything. And I think it freed up people in an interesting way to be able to get into the more nuanced complexity of his life, because it wasn't going to be the story of a guy, obviously East Lake had already happened, but we all know what Tiger cares about. It's the 100 wins versus the 19 majors, right? So I think that it made people feel more comfortable diving into the sort of the more complex stuff. I think the story would have been incredible either way, but certainly there's a difference between ending on East Lake and ending at Augusta. Mm-hmm. I thought that was nice. And I think it raised an interesting question afterwards, which was, the media talked a lot about redemption afterwards, right? That was the word that they kept using. And I was always puzzled by that, because what I said earlier was I don't think any of us set out to make a morality tale, to wag our fingers and say, this is bad behavior, shame on you. And and all the scandal stuff, that wasn't what we were interested in doing. But what was interesting to me about the redemption sort of theme that the media came out with was it did feel like a morality theme. It was like, shame on you, Tiger, but now because you won a golf tournament, no longer shame on you. You're now redeemed in our eyes. And I just was baffled by that, because I was like, the hell does Tiger have to redeem himself in anybody's eyes except for his wife and family? It reeked of sort of the Billy Payne, dressing down that was given to Tiger. It was like, shame on you, but now that you won, everything's forgiven. You're apparently redeemed now. And so I was just like, the hell does that have to do with anything? And then when we started talking to folks, one of the things that they, started mentioning was that they saw a carefree Tiger for the first time in so many years. A guy that was like hanging out and shooting the shit with the fellow tour pros, interacting with fans, just enjoying the game again. And it goes back to something that you raised, Cal, which was this sort of in the introvert extrovert section was, it was sort of felt like a return to the guy who was dancing in Dina's living room and unbuttoning his shirt and just being carefree, because between that time and 2018, the Tiger that we mostly saw was the stone cold assassin who never talked to anybody and intimidated the hell out of the world, right? And to see him return to that from everybody we talked to, they all were just like, that's the thing that was different, is that he seemed to enjoy playing the game of golf again.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that endlessly fascinating because, you know, you had mentioned watching Charlie and him play at the, what is it, the PNC? Is that what it's called?
PNC Father and Son. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was interesting because I remember watching that tournament. You know, I didn't watch the thing live, but I saw Tiger being interviewed about it afterwards. And one of the things that he talked about is somebody said, like, oh, what are you going to do with Charlie? Like, how are you going to teach him? And all this kind of stuff. And he said, I just want him to enjoy whatever he does, you know? Yeah. And that is an interesting perspective for a guy who, you know, asked his kindergarten teacher if he could play another sport and was told no, because dad won't let it happen. And, you know, was driven in a way that nobody else had been driven before, but maybe is a guy who, you know, said to be able to say, I don't care what he does. I just want him to be happy and enjoy what he's doing. And if it's golf, great. And if it's something else, great. That fascinated me. And I thought that was really interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, I don't know, Dan, I don't know if you have anything else. I'm sure Matt's got to go.
I got two things.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. What surprised you? We all kind of knew the story, right? Because of the headlines and everything. Yeah. What surprised you the most when you dug in? And when he can't play on tour anymore, what is he going to do?
I can answer the second one first, which is I have no idea. I don't think anybody does. I don't even know if Tiger does, honestly. Like, you know, I think everybody would love it. You know, the people that follow him and love him would just, whatever the scene is, it called the Champions Tour or something?
Champions Tour.
Yeah. So I think everybody would love that because we got to see what Phil could do when he did that this past year, right? I mean, he did. Yeah. He played extremely well, and even said that there was something for him that was great about, you know, being freed up and not the lack of competition, because that's silly to say, but the easier competition. Phil has talked about being something that was rewarding for him because it allowed him to just hit the ball and play his game and not be too worried about, like, oh, well, I got to catch up to DJ and I got to catch up to all these folks. And I don't think there's a world where Tiger's not going to be trying to play the Masters for many in the majors for many more years to come. Right. But it would be great, I'm sure, for a lot of folks to be able to see him go out and play with these guys that, you know, because what'll be great about it is obviously is that he'll go back to playing against VJ and Ernie and like all of these guys that he was playing against when he was at peak Tiger Woods in the Tiger Slam era.
I want a Rocco Tiger repeat.
There we go. Yeah. I mean, I think it would be endlessly fascinating to watch, and who knows, maybe he has the Phil experience where, you know, it unlocks something that may or may not need to be unlocked, you know, but that's total conjecture. I mean, I have no idea. And then what was the first question?
What surprised you the most when you
yeah. I mean, I've already talked about it, but it's the truth. I think that the thing that just blew me away was how protective these people were of him. Like you just wouldn't expect that, especially from the people, you know, you can see how much people are still hurt to this day by Tiger cutting them out of his life, but they still care so much about him. And you know, Steve Williams hints at it at first, but he sort of, you know, in his introduction in part one, but he says, you know, he talks about how when you see what he has to go through and you see the life that he's had to live and how much pressure he's under and how much the media and the public has created this image in their mind of who Tiger Woods is. I think, you know, he says, you can't help but be protective of the guy. And it's fascinating. You know, I understand that when you're his caddy, I don't understand it as much, or didn't expect it as much, rather when you're his caddy for 11 years, you win 13 majors with him. And then, you know, because you caddy for one guy for one tournament, he cuts you out. and you're
You
still
had to
protective
bring
of him.
you had to bring this up, didn't you? Because this is like season 5 of 90210 for Cal. Because his favorite golfer out there is Adam Scott.
There we go.
Little love triangle going on here.
Yeah, no, I don't have. I unfortunately don't have any more detail than what's in the movie and what Stevie talked about. But look, I think that's just so interesting that they got to see something that made them. I mean, and what's incredible is like, Tiger is arguably one of the most powerful people in the world in terms of he's wealthy beyond anybody's imagination. He has enormous sway over media companies and tours and all sorts of stuff. And yet, his Mark O'Mara's niece, Amber Loria, who's in the movie, who spent like time with Tiger when he was, 20 something years old till 2009. Like she's still out here trying to protect Tiger. He clearly doesn't need her to protect him, but every single one of these people that we talked to was just so fiercely protective of this guy. That says something to me about what he actually went through on a day-to-day basis and how hard it is to be Tiger Woods. So that was the thing.
I mean, would you label it as respect? Because obviously there's some pain, there's some hurt, there's some maybe disappointment, but I wouldn't know what else to call it other than respect for a guy and what he's done.
I don't even know if it's about his accomplishments. I think it goes back to this idea of, what Amber talks about in the movie about how he would go scuba diving so that because the fishies don't know who I am down there. That's what he would tell her, right?
Yeah.
If here's this guy that is just so dominant at everything that he does on the golf course, right? He seemed like the Terminator for a large period of time. And that guy has to go escape down to the bottom of the ocean so that he can feel like a normal human being. I think if you see that over and over again, I almost think that a lot of these people would sort of almost like not brush aside the golf dominance, but it's like that wasn't the thing that they were concerned with as much because Tiger had that part of it all under control. It was the part that really seemed to concern them was this guy has been turned into a godlike figure and he has to live with that every single day. And when we would reach out to them, that's what they wanted to make sure that we weren't just going to be building him up and we weren't just going to be tearing him down because that's happened. That's the pattern that's sort of happened over and over with the guy, right? Is build him up into a god. And then when he's human, tear him down. And then it started to happen again at the 2019 Masters, right? That was that was part of the redemption story was like, hey, he's a god. And, when we're in our 40s, we can still be gods. That was like the thing that that was getting built up about him. And then, but again, I think, one of the goals was, okay, he's not a god, he's just a man. And let's just get to the bottom of who this human being is. And that's sort of what Pete McDaniel talks about right before Earl talks at the end when the Tiger's walking up the 18th fairway is that, he's in the process of becoming a better person like every single one of us. But to say that he's this, fundamentally different version or that he's virtuous now or that, he was a god before, but all this stuff, he's a human being. And that is when Pete said that when we were interviewing him was just like this revelatory moment of right. Like this is not the person that's been built up in the media. And that's not a bad thing to say. Like, being a human being is, I think,
it's real life.
Yeah. So I remember when Pete said that and just thinking like, this is incredible. It's sort of, if there was ever something to be left with at the end of this thing, it's Pete's statement as he's walking up the 18th fairway at Augusta. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Matt, I know we've kept you. We've probably hit our allotted time with you. Dan, hold on. Dan said not yet.
I thought you were going to go there, so you weren't. I can't let him go without this one question.
Sure.
It's the most important one. The most important feedback. Did you get it? Has the Tiger Camp? Have they seen it? And did they?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Right,
and we talked to different people. half the people that knew him really well said he'll never watch it, and half the people said he reads and watches every single thing that is done about him, and he'll 100% watch it. So I hope that when he does, I really truly hope that he sees it as a a nuanced and complex telling of his life, but one that ultimately, I think, we really tried to get inside of his head as much as anything else and show the world from his perspective, and to show the pressure that he was under, I think was incredibly important to telling an accurate story. So I hope when he watches it, he at least sees that, that component of it.
I think he'll enjoy it.
Well, I thought it was well put together. I thought it was, again, factual. I thought it was a series of events over the course of his life. I thought you brought in many, many people, and I'm glad that the individuals that did take the opportunity to come on and share. And I think they shared positive stories. Sometimes positive stories aren't always the best stories, but there's something to take away from it. And I'm going to be honest, I've watched it multiple times. Friends in the golf community, that I'm around, they've commented that they've watched it multiple times, and it's really, trying to dissect, right? Because I think the biggest thing was, it's like, what's it going to be? And to your point, is it a tabloid? Is it a golf story? Is it a story about a man that just happens to be a golfer? And, and I think it is definitely not a tabloid. It's not a smear fest in any way, shape, form, or fashion. I think it's extremely factual. And I think it really lays out something that shows you can be the best, and you still may not be the best at some things. Right. And it's real life, man. It's just who we are as people, as humans. So
we're all messy. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
Really appreciate it.